In the bitter cold of a December night in rural upstate New York, Emma Walsh and her 2 young children were barely surviving in their falling apart wooden cottage. A 27-year-old widow with a daughter battling a failing heart and a son who still asked when Daddy was coming home. She had nothing left but her dignity and the desperate hope that tomorrow might be kinder. Then one stormy evening, fate delivered a dying stranger to her doorstep. A man in an expensive suit, bleeding heavily from what looked like bullet wounds. His black Mercedes flipped over in the snow beside him. Despite having barely enough food to feed her own children, Emma could not turn away a soul in need. She dragged him inside, tended his wounds with her trembling hands, and shared their last can of soup. Little did this struggling widow know that she had just saved the life of the most dangerous crime boss on the East Coast, and her single act of kindness would transform not just the mysterious stranger's fate, but the destiny of her entire family. What dark secrets was this wounded man carrying that would change everything for the poor widow who saved him? And why were the people who shot him willing to kill anyone who knew he was still alive? Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a single act of mercy on the darkest night. But to understand how that fateful night changed Emma Walsh's life forever, we must turn back the clock 8 months earlier. To the day her world completely collapsed, Emma still remembered that morning with painful clarity. Standing in the small kitchen of her husband's family home, one hand resting on her 3-month pregnant belly, the other gently stirring a bowl of porridge for Lucy and Max. Ryan, her husband, kissed her forehead before heading out, telling her he'd be home early because it was Lucy's birthday. That was the last time she ever saw him alive. That afternoon, 2 police officers appeared at the front door, their faces heavy with sympathy. They said Ryan's car had lost its brakes on a mountain road and plunged into a ravine 50 meters deep. He died instantly. Emma collapsed at the doorway, and in the depths of her agony, she felt warm blood running down her thighs. The child in her womb, the child Ryan never even got to know the gender of, left her to follow its father. In a single day, Emma lost both the man she loved and the child she never got to hold. But the tragedy didn't end there. Her husband's family, the people she believed would support her in her darkest hour, turned their backs on her with ruthless cruelty. Her mother-in-law, Patricia Walsh, stood directly in front of her at Ryan's funeral and said that if Emma hadn't forced her husband to work extra hours to pay off debts, he wouldn't have died. She placed all the blame on Emma, called her husband's killer, and 1 week after the funeral, she threw Emma and the 2 children out of the main house. The only thing she gave them was a decaying wooden cabin on the edge of the property, a place even the servants refused to live in. Emma carried her children into that house, with its leaking roof, cracked walls, and a heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Lucy, her 8-year-old daughter, looked at her mother with eyes far older than her age, and said, "It's okay, Mom, we still have each other." Those words alone gave Emma the strength to stand again, but fate still wasn't finished with her. Just 2 months after Ryan's death, Lucy began showing strange symptoms. She was constantly exhausted, short of breath, and sometimes clutched her chest as if her heart were being squeezed by an invisible hand. Emma rushed her to the hospital, where Dr. Williams looked at her with deep compassion and explained that Lucy had a heart condition from birth, a valve defect that had gone undetected for years. The child needed surgery within 6 months, or her small heart would stop beating. The cost of the operation was $200,000, a number Emma couldn't even begin to understand. She sold everything she could, her wedding ring, the necklace her mother had left her before passing away, the family silverware, even the wedding dress she had treasured like a sacred memory. But it was only enough to cover a small portion of the medical bills and rent. The bank called every week, the voices on the line growing colder each time. 3 months, they said. And if the debt wasn't paid, even this fragile wooden house would be taken away. Then there was Victor, the loan shark Ryan had borrowed from before his death. He showed up at her door every week, his dull eyes looking over her body with a hunger that made her skin crawl. He told her that if she didn't have money, she could pay in other ways. And more than once, his rough hands tried to grab her before she managed to escape. Emma worked 3 jobs a day. At dawn, she cleaned houses for 3 families in town. In the afternoon, she took in sewing work. And at night, she sold eggs and vegetables from the small garden behind the cabin. She slept no more than 4 hours a night, ate no more than 1 meal a day, giving everything to Lucy and Max. Her hands grew rough and calloused. Her back ached constantly, but she didn't dare stop, because every time she looked into Lucy's eyes, she knew time was running out. And late at night, when the children were finally asleep, Emma knelt beside her bed, tears streaming down her face, and prayed to God for a miracle. She had no idea that miracle would arrive in the form of a blood-soaked man on a snowstorm night, and that it would change everything in ways she never could have imagined. That night, Emma's small wooden cabin turned into a makeshift emergency room, while the snowstorm howled outside, after she and the 2 children struggled together to drag the large man inside and lay him on the only worn-out bed in the house. Emma finally had the chance to examine his injuries beneath the faint glow of the oil lamp. Blood was still flowing from the wound in his chest, soaking through the expensive white shirt beneath his suit jacket. She cut away the fabric, and her heart tightened when she saw the bullet still lodged there, trapped just beneath his ribs. She knew she had to remove it, or he would die from infection long before he could reach a hospital. And the nearest hospital was more than 40 kilometers away, with no way for anyone to travel through a storm like this. Lucy, her daughter, stood beside her with wide eyes filled with worry, yet she didn't cry. The girl asked what her mother needed, and Emma told her to hold the oil lamp steady. Max was asked to boil water on the wood stove and gather every clean piece of cloth he could find. Emma took the tweezers from her sewing kit, passed them through the flame to clean them, and began a task she never imagined she would have to do. When she inserted the tweezers into the wound, the man let out a low groan of pain, despite still being unconscious. Emma bit her lip, her hands trembling, but she didn't stop. She had cared for her own mother during her final days while she fought cancer, and she had learned how to stay calm in the worst situations imaginable. After nearly 20 minutes of suffocating tension, the bullet finally came free and dropped onto a chipped ceramic plate with a sharp metallic clink. Blood poured out even faster, and Emma quickly pressed cloths firmly against the wound, holding them there until the flow slowed and finally stopped. She cleaned the injury with warm salt water, applied the last of the antibiotic ointment left over from Lucy's previous infection, and carefully wrapped the wound with strips torn from an old bed sheet. But her work didn't end there. The man developed a high fever, his body burning like hot coals, sweat soaking the pillow beneath his head. He began to drift into delirium, his head turning from side to side, his lips murmuring broken fragments of words. Emma sat beside him, wiping sweat from his forehead with a damp cloth, trying every method she knew to bring the fever down. It was during those long hours that she heard him call out a woman's name. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice torn apart by pain. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." Then he spoke another name. "My son Daniel, I'm sorry I failed you." Tears slipped from the corners of the man's tightly closed eyes, and Emma felt her heart twist. She didn't know who Sarah and Daniel were, but she recognized the pain in his voice, the same pain she had felt when she lost Ryan and the child she never got to hold. This man, whoever he was, carried wounds no one could see, wounds far deeper than the bullet in his chest. Lucy sat beside her mother, her eyes heavy with sleep, yet refusing to leave. She looked at the strange man and asked if he was crying. Emma nodded, and Lucy said, "Maybe he lost someone too, like we lost Dad." Emma's heart softened at her daughter's compassion. She pulled Lucy into her arms, kissed her hair, and told her to go to sleep because they would need to wake early in the morning. Max had long since fallen asleep on the wooden chair near the stove, exhausted after running back and forth to help his mother for hours. Emma gently lifted him, laid him in bed beside Lucy, tucked the blankets around them, then returned to the bedside of the wounded stranger. She stayed awake the entire night, never taking her eyes off him. She replaced the cold cloth whenever it warmed, wiped away sweat, checked the wound, and prayed silently in her heart, asking that he wouldn't die in this house. Outside, the storm slowly eased as dawn approached. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the snow-covered window and filled the small room. And as if that light carried a miracle with it, Emma placed her hand on the man's forehead and realized the fever had broken. He was still unconscious, but his breathing was steadier, his face no longer twisted in pain. He had survived the worst of it. Emma let out a long breath, and for the first time in many months, she felt as though she had done something right. She didn't know who this man was, didn't know why he had been shot, didn't know what secrets he carried. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was that he was still alive, and she had saved a life. 2 days passed inside that small wooden cabin, and Emma barely left the bedside of the unknown man. She changed his bandages twice each day, forced him to drink water and thin porridge, by gently tilting his head and pouring each small spoonful past his cracked lips. The fever had completely gone away. The wound had begun to heal, and color was slowly returning to his once pale face. Then, on the afternoon of the second day, as Emma sat by the fire reheating a bowl of porridge, she heard movement from the inner room. A faint groan, then the soft rustle of fabric. She rose at once and hurried inside, and that was when she saw the man's eyes open for the first time. They were dark gray, like the sky before a storm, sharp and weary. The instant he woke, though his body was still weak, those eyes swept the room. With the instinct of a predator searching for danger, they paused on the door, the window, every shadowed corner where a threat might hide. And only then did they settle on Emma's face. The man tried to sit up, but pain tore through his chest and forced a groan from his throat. As he fell back onto the pillow, memories seemed to surge back into him, because Emma saw those eyes darken for a brief moment, as if he were reliving something horrifying. He remembers, she thought, the night he was shot and nearly died. His voice broke the silence, hoarse from days of not being used, yet still carrying an authority that almost made Emma step back. "Who are you?" he asked. "Where is this place?" His gray eyes fixed on her as if trying to read every thought in her mind. Emma stood still, the bowl of porridge still in her hands, and replied in a calm voice that surprised even herself. "I'm the one who saved your life," she said, "and this is my home. You were badly wounded and nearly died in the snowstorm. I removed the bullet from your chest and took care of you for 2 days." The man frowned, clearly not used to being spoken to that way. He glanced down at his chest, saw the white bandages wrapped tightly around it, then looked back at Emma with an expression caught between suspicion and curiosity. "You took the bullet out," he said, more a statement than a question. "By yourself." Emma nodded, offering no further explanation. She stepped closer, set the bowl of porridge on the small wooden table beside the bed, and told him he should eat something. That he hadn't had a proper meal in 2 days. He didn't touch the bowl at once, instead continuing to study her with that searching gaze. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice low and careful, as if testing her. Emma met his eyes without the slightest fear, and answered that no, she didn't know, and she didn't care. She only knew he was someone who needed help, and she had given it. Now that he was awake, he should eat to regain his strength, and when he was well enough, he could go wherever he wished. The man fell silent for a long moment, his gray eyes never leaving her face. For 10 years, since he rose to lead the DeLuca family, no one had dared speak to him in such a tone. No one had dared meet his gaze without lowering their head. No one had ever shown indifference to his identity. Yet this woman, with her rough hands and worn clothes, stood before him without fear, even with a trace of irritation in her voice, as if saving a wounded stranger were nothing more than a small inconvenience in her day. He didn't know why, but it intrigued him more than anything had in many years. At last, he reached for the bowl of porridge and lifted a spoonful to his mouth. It was thin and bland, seasoned only with a little salt and a few slices of ginger, but it was the best thing he had ever tasted, because it was the first food he had eaten after escaping death. While he ate, Emma stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered yard. She didn't look at him, as if his presence in her home were merely temporary, not something worth much thought. And it was that attitude, that strange, steady calm, that made Dante DeLuca feel for the first time in his life that he might not be the most frightening person in the room. The following afternoon, while Emma was busy washing clothes in the backyard, Lucy tiptoed into the room where the injured man was resting. She held a glass of water in her hands, her steps careful, as if afraid to disturb him, while her wide eyes kept flicking toward the man on the bed. With a mix of curiosity and hesitation, Dante had his eyes closed, resting. But the instincts of a man who had survived in the underworld made him immediately aware that someone had entered the room. He opened his eyes, and instead of the serious face of the woman who had saved him, he saw a thin little girl with brown hair braided into 2 plaits. Standing beside the bed, her lips pressed together as if she were gathering all her courage. "I brought you water," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom said you need to drink a lot so you can get better faster." Dante looked at her, and something in his chest tightened in a strange and unexpected way. The girl was about 8 years old, nearly the age Daniel would have been if his son were still alive. Her eyes weren't like Daniel's, but the way she looked at him, half frightened and half curious, reminded him of the times Daniel used to sneak into his office to see what his father was doing. He reached out to take the glass of water, making an effort to soften his voice as he said, "Thank you." Lucy's eyes widened in surprise, as if she hadn't expected this frightening man to know how to say thank you. She smiled, a small smile, yet bright enough to light up the dim room, and it was that smile that made Dante's heart, the heart he thought had gone numb 5 years earlier, suddenly stir. At that moment, a boy of about 6 burst into the room like a small whirlwind. His eyes shining with excitement, Max rushed to the bedside, showing none of his sister's fear, and stared at Dante with open admiration. "Mister," the boy asked, his voice bursting with excitement, "are you a superhero? Mom said you were shot and didn't die?" "Only superheroes don't die when they get shot." Lucy hurried to pull her brother's hand, telling him he shouldn't ask questions like that. But Max wouldn't be quiet. He kept asking what superpowers Dante had, whether he could fly, whether he was as strong as Superman. Dante looked at the boy, and for the first time in many years, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "No," he replied, his voice deep but no longer cold. "I'm not a superhero. I'm just someone who was lucky enough to be saved by your mother." Max looked a little disappointed at first, but then his face brightened again as he said it was okay. "Even if you're not a superhero, you're still really cool, because you have a bullet scar and you drive a Mercedes." Lucy gently took her brother's hand and told him they should let the man rest, but before leaving, she turned back to Dante and said softly that she was glad he didn't die, that her mom stayed up all night taking care of him, and if he had died, her mom would have been very sad. Then the 2 children ran outside, leaving Dante alone in the room. With a heart beating wildly in his chest, he didn't understand why the innocent words of 2 children could reach him so deeply, why the smile of that thin little girl made him ache for Daniel until it nearly stole his breath, why the foolish questions of a 6-year-old boy made him want to smile for the first time in 5 years. Outside the doorway, Emma had been standing there for some time, silently watching everything. She saw the look in the man's eyes as he watched her children, and she realized it wasn't the look of a dangerous man, not the look of someone cold-blooded. It was the look of a father, a man who had once loved a child and had lost that child. She didn't know his story, didn't know who Sarah and Daniel were, the names he whispered in delirium. But she knew one thing: behind those ice-cold eyes was a heart that had once been shattered, The days that followed passed slowly inside the small wooden cabin, and Dante was forced to remain still in bed to give his wound time to heal, for a man who was used to commanding an empire, used to giving orders to hundreds and deciding the fate of thousands. Lying motionless like someone useless was a form of torture. Yet it was precisely this time that gave him the chance to observe the life of the small family that had saved him. And what he saw caused his frozen heart to begin melting little by little. Every day, Emma woke before dawn, around 4 a.m, when the entire world was still wrapped in darkness. Dante knew this because he couldn't sleep either, and he heard her soft footsteps moving through the house, the crackle of wood as she lit the stove, the sound of water boiling as she prepared breakfast for her children. Then she left before the sun rose, leaving Lucy and Max with a few gentle instructions, and didn't return until the sky was completely dark. He heard the children say that their mother went to clean other people's houses, that she took in sewing work at night, that she sold eggs and vegetables at the market every weekend. One woman working 3 jobs a day, just to feed 2 children and a stranger lying injured in her bed. What hurt Dante the most was the way Emma divided the food at every meal. She always gave Lucy and Max the larger portions, the bigger pieces of meat when there was meat, the thicker spoonfuls of porridge, while her own share was mostly water and a few strands of vegetables. Many times he saw her sit at the table watching her children eat, telling them that she had already eaten, that she wasn't hungry. But he knew it was a lie, because he heard her stomach growl in the silence of the kitchen. She was starving herself so her children could be full. And it made him think of Sarah, of how his wife had once sacrificed everything for Daniel without ever complaining. Then there were moments when Dante witnessed Lucy coughing, long fits that made the girl clutch her chest, her face twisting in pain. She tried to cough as quietly as possible so her mother wouldn't hear, tried to hide her suffering so her mother wouldn't worry. But Dante saw everything. He saw her lips turn pale after each fit, saw her small hands tremble as they gripped the fabric over her chest, and he understood that her illness was far more serious than it appeared. Max, young as he was, understood it too. The 6-year-old often gave his portion to his sister, saying he was full, telling her to eat, even though he was still hungry. Once, Dante saw the boy secretly slip a boiled egg into his sister's pocket when she wasn't looking, then lie to their mother and say he had eaten everything already, only 6 years old, and the boy already knew how to sacrifice, how to protect his sister in his own way. Dante looked at him and saw Daniel, remembered how his own son had once been just as innocent and kind. Before everything was torn away from him, one evening when Emma thought Dante was asleep, he heard the phone ring. She stepped out onto the back porch to answer it, but her voice still carried inside through the thin door. First, it was a call from the bank, and he heard her beg in a trembling voice, "Please give me more time. I'll earn the money. Please don't take our house." Then came another call, this time from the hospital, and her voice sounded even more desperate as she asked if there was no other way, no assistance program. Because her daughter would die without surgery. The call ended, and Dante heard her footsteps returning inside. He opened his eyes slightly and looked through the narrow gap, and what he saw made his heart feel as if it were being crushed. Emma was sitting in a dark corner of the kitchen, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she cried. She cried without a sound, swallowing every sob so her children wouldn't hear, but the pain spilled out in the tears streaming down her cheeks. She was carrying everything alone, crushing debt, a gravely ill daughter, a house about to be taken away, and no one to lean on. Dante lay in the darkness watching that woman cry, and he wondered how shoulders so slender could bear so much. He had met many people in his life, the powerful, the wealthy, the ruthless, but he had never met anyone as strong as this woman. And that night, Dante DeLuca, the coldest crime boss on the East Coast of the United States, made a silent decision. He would repay this woman by any means necessary, whether she wanted it or not. One afternoon, while Emma was out delivering sewn items to a client, and Max was asleep for his midday nap, Lucy walked into Dante's room with a glass of water, as she usually did. But this time, instead of setting the glass down and leaving, she lingered beside the bed, her wide eyes fixed on Dante, as if there were something she wanted to say. Dante noticed the change at once. He asked softly if something was wrong, and as if she had been waiting for that question. Lucy climbed onto the wooden chair beside the bed, sat down, and began to talk. At first, it was only small, scattered things. About the school she had to stop attending because there was no money to pay the fees. About the old doll she still hugged every night, even though it was worn and torn. About Max and the mischief her little brother always got into. Then little by little her voice grew quieter, her gaze dropping to her hands folded together in her lap. "Do you know," Lucy said, her voice barely a whisper, "my mom cries every night." Dante stayed silent. He knew it already. He had seen it with his own eyes the night before. But he wanted her to continue. Lucy said her mother thought she didn't know, but she knew everything. She could hear her mother crying after she went to sleep. Her mom tried to cry very softly, but the house was so small that Lucy could still hear it. She cried because she missed Dad. She cried because she worried about money. She cried because Lucy was sick. Dante felt his chest tighten as he listened to those words, spoken by an 8-year-old child. He asked Lucy about her father, and she told him that her dad had died 8 months ago, that his car had crashed, and that people said he had gone to heaven to be with God. Her voice was frighteningly calm, as if she had grown used to loss, as if she had accepted it as part of life. Then Lucy lifted her head and looked at Dante, and what she said next felt like a punch straight to his heart. "Uncle," she said, "I'm going to die soon too, like Dad." Dante froze, unable to believe what he had just heard. Lucy went on, her voice still painfully calm. "I heard the doctor talking to Mom at the hospital last time. The doctor said my heart is broken and needs surgery. But Mom doesn't have money, so I won't get the surgery. And if I don't get it, I'll die. I'm only 8. But I know what dying means. It means I'll go to where Dad is. And I'll never see Mom and Max again." Dante felt his eyes burn, a sensation he hadn't known since the day he buried his wife and son. He asked Lucy if she was scared, and her answer nearly broke him. "I'm not scared of dying." Lucy shook her head. "I'm just scared Mom will be sad. Mom cried so much when Dad died. If I die too, she'll cry even more. I don't want Mom to cry. I want her to smile. But I don't know how to make my heart stop being broken." Dante looked at the thin little girl in front of him, an 8-year-old child with a failing heart and the soul of an angel. She wasn't afraid of death, only afraid of her mother's sorrow. She didn't cry for herself, only for the pain of others. And in that moment, Dante saw Daniel in Lucy. He saw the same innocence and kindness his son once had. Before it was stolen from this world, he didn't think. He simply acted on instinct. He reached out, took Lucy's small hand in his, and looked straight into her eyes. "Lucy," he said, his voice deep and steady, "you won't die, I promise you." Lucy's eyes widened in surprise, but Dante tightened his grip on her hand. "I don't know how yet, but I promise you'll have the surgery. You'll be healthy and you'll live to see your mom smile every day. This is my promise to you." It was the first promise Dante DeLuca had spoken in 5 years. Since the day he stood beside the graves of his wife and son, and swore he would never promise anything to anyone again, because every promise he made turned into a lie. But as he looked into Lucy's clear eyes, he knew this was a promise he would keep at any cost, even if it meant trading his own life. That evening, after the children had gone to sleep, and Emma was sitting under the faint glow of the oil lamp, sewing quietly, Dante called her over and made a request. He said he needed to borrow her phone to contact his people. His voice low and serious. Emma looked at him with caution and asked who he intended to call and whether it would bring danger to her family. Dante replied that he only needed to contact someone he trusted, to let them know he was still alive, and he promised he wouldn't allow any danger to come near this house. Emma hesitated for a long moment, then finally handed him her old phone. Its screen cracked at one corner, and told him she would trust him this once. But if anything happened to her children, she would kill him with her own hands, no matter who he was. Dante almost laughed at the threat, but he restrained himself and simply nodded. When Emma returned to the inner room, Dante dialed a number he had known by heart for more than 10 years. After only 2 rings, the familiar voice of Julian Rossi came through the line. Filled with worry and panic, "Boss," Julian nearly shouted, "where are you? Are you all right? We've been looking for you everywhere for almost 2 weeks. The police found your car flipped over, but no body. Romano is telling everyone you're dead." Dante cut him off with his familiar cold tone, and said he was alive and in a safe place, but he needed Julian to do several things immediately. Julian fell silent at once and listened, because that was how their relationship had worked for more than 20 years. Dante gave orders, and Julian carried them out without asking why. Dante began listing what he needed. First, investigate everything about the Walsh family, about Emma Walsh and her 2 children, about her deceased husband, Ryan Walsh, and about the true cause of the car accident 8 months earlier. Second, find every debt Emma was carrying: bank loans, loan shark debts, hospital bills, everything. Third, prepare $200,000 and transfer it to the hospital to cover the cost of heart surgery for Lucy Walsh, Emma's daughter. Fourth, pay off all of her debts without letting her know where the money came from. Julian was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line, and when he finally spoke, his voice was filled with clear astonishment. "Boss," he said slowly, "I've followed you for more than 20 years, and I've never seen you help an outsider like this. Who is this woman that makes you do all of this?" Dante was quiet for a moment. Then he answered in a voice he barely recognized himself, softer, more human. "She's the woman who saved my life," he said. "She dragged me out of a snowstorm, removed a bullet from my chest, and took care of me for nearly 2 weeks, while she barely had anything to eat herself. She's carrying the weight of the entire world on her shoulders, and hasn't complained even once. I owe her my life, and I'm going to repay that debt." Julian understood immediately, and said he would handle everything within 48 hours, and make sure no one would know where the money came from. Before hanging up, Julian added one last sentence that made Dante freeze. "I'm glad you're alive, boss," Julian said, his voice unusually sincere. "But I'm even more glad because it seems like you're coming back to life in another way, a way I haven't seen in you for 5 years." Since Sarah and Daniel were gone, Dante ended the call without replying, but deep down he knew Julian was right. Something was changing inside him, and it had begun with a woman who had rough hands and unbreakable eyes that never bowed. 10 days had passed since the phone call with Julian, and Dante's wound had healed enough for him to walk again, though sharp movement still brought pain. During that time, life inside the small wooden cabin unfolded with an unusual calm, as if time itself had paused to allow everyone a brief rest before the coming storm. Dante began helping with small tasks around the house, fixing a chair with a broken leg, sealing the cracks in the walls so the cold wind wouldn't seep inside. He didn't speak much, but his presence made the house feel less empty, and Emma, though she wouldn't admit it, slowly grew used to having a man in the house again. After 8 months of solitude, Lucy and Max clung to Dante as if he had long been part of the family. And every time Emma watched him play with the children, a strange warmth rose in her chest, a feeling she didn't dare name. Then that afternoon arrived, the afternoon when everything changed. Emma was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard the sound of car engines approaching from afar, not one but several, their powerful steady rumble like the beat of war drums. She let go of the shirt in her hands and stepped toward the front of the house, and what she saw made the blood in her veins turn cold. Three jet-black SUVs were driving down the dirt road leading to her cabin, vehicles so luxurious they had never appeared in this remote countryside. They came to a stop in a neat line before the yard, and the doors opened almost at the same time. Emma pulled Lucy and Max behind her, clutching them tightly in her trembling arms as she watched the men step out. They were large, solid men, dressed in perfect black suits like mourners at a funeral, faces cold as ice, eyes sharp as razors. She counted 10 of them, 10 men who looked like professional killers, and they were walking toward her home. Emma's heart pounded wildly in her chest. She didn't know what was happening, didn't know who these men were or why they had come. She only knew that a mother's instinct was screaming inside her, to protect her children at all costs. Lucy gripped her mother's hand, her voice shaking as she asked who they were, while Max hid behind Emma's legs, his wide eyes filled with terror. Then a man stepped forward from the first vehicle, tall with salt and pepper hair and eyes sharp as a hawk's. He scanned the area before his gaze settled on the doorway of the wooden house. Emma followed his line of sight and saw Dante standing there, stepping out from inside with a presence completely different from the wounded man she had cared for over the past 2 weeks. He stood straight, shoulders broad, eyes cold. The way he carried himself radiating an authority Emma had never noticed before. And then something happened that left her frozen, forgetting how to breathe. The salt and pepper-haired man walked quickly toward Dante, and when he was only a few steps away, he stopped, bowed his head respectfully, and spoke in a voice filled with respect. "Boss, I'm relieved you're safe. The men have been worried for 2 weeks. Boss." Emma heard the word and felt as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over her head. She looked at Dante, then at the man bowing before him, then at the 10 guards standing in perfect formation like statues, and everything began to fall into place in her mind, forming a terrifying picture: the expensive suit that night, the sleek black Mercedes, the gunshot wound, the way he spoke as if giving orders, the icy eyes of someone who had seen and done things ordinary people couldn't imagine. She turned back to Dante, her voice trembling as she asked, "Who are you? Who are you really?" Dante looked at her, and for the first time since he woke up, he didn't know what to say. It was Julian who spoke, his voice cutting clearly through the suffocating silence. "This is Dante DeLuca," he said, "the head of the DeLuca family, the most powerful crime boss in the underworld of the East Coast of the United States." Emma felt her knees weaken. She had saved a crime boss, brought a killer into her home with her 2 young children, fed him and sheltered him under the same roof for 2 weeks. She looked at Dante, and in her eyes there was no longer curiosity or warmth, only sheer terror and a deep, aching sense of betrayal.